And there's nothing to me any more serious than this point that you find highlighted in these notes tonight under the name of experience. Because you don't really know anything as well as you can know it until you have experienced it. And when I was thinking of this subject, I recalled a little incident that happened down in Laguna Beach this summer while I was there. One afternoon, on my way down the little footpath to the beach, I saw these two very perplexed ladies standing by a parking meter with this worried attitude, and one of them called me. I was going to ask when I approached them, I was going to ask if I could help, but I didn't have to because one of them asked me. She said, "Can you tell me which slot I should put this nickel in for where my car is?" It was one of those single stakes that carried 2 meter heads, and it was planted right squarely on the line. And it just happened that the lines were diagonally drawn at that spot because it went around the curve. So it was easy enough to see that the arrow pointing this way was for the car that was that side of the line. The arrow pointing this way was for the car that's this side of the line. But they were from out of state, and they may not have had any acquaintance with this sort of thing. So when she asked me if I could tell her, I said, "Yes, it is this way." "Are you sure?" I said, "Yes, I'm quite sure." They pinched their nipples, looked at it. "I don't know." Well, I said, "Let me explain it to you, and I'll show you just exactly how it is so you..." "No, I don't understand these things." And I said, "Well, I can fix it very easily so you can understand it." No. She would much rather worry that I was right. She said to her sister or whoever it was with her, "Oh, I hope he's right." And I said, "Well, don't take my word for it. Ask someone else." But I could fix it so you never have to ask anyone else. If you just let me describe this simple... And then I thought, well, there are none so blind as those who will not see. I didn't make that up. It's been said for years, and I used to repeat it, and I didn't quite understand. I can't say that I understand it fully now, but it has greater meaning for me now than it ever did before. After you have had certain experiences on a level that is beyond the visible level, you can't describe it in a way that will be satisfactory to someone who has never had a similar experience. If people are fond of you, they will try to accept it. And even if they're not, they will at least think about it. But you're talking in a dimension that they have not entered. And it's just as difficult to try to speak about a 4-dimensional experience in terms of 3 dimensions as it was to try to tell that woman or try to get permission to explain the thing to her. She just wouldn't have it. Whether she wants to go through life always asking someone whom she feels must surely know. I must have looked so stupid that she didn't quite trust me. But the idea is anyone has the same equipment that the next has. And anyone can, if he will go into that dimension, start awakening it and draw it forth. But if he won't do it, if he's going to stay closed off in the dimension where he sits, he's going to sit and sit. And then he will complain and he will wonder, just as this woman wanted to go on wondering and pinching her nickel lest she squander one and it not be the right one. Well, we've got more at stake than a nickel in this thing. I don't mean just in this class. You all know what you've got in the class. But I mean in learning this sort of thing. Our very survival is at stake. And I think of Benjamin Franklin's quotation about experience when he says, "Experience keeps a dear school, but fools will learn in no other and scarce in that. For it is true, we may give advice, but we cannot give conduct. And that is the secret of the whole thing. Whether we're conducting our own exploration, whether we're being directed into something of ourselves, is the whole difference of whether we're succeeding or not. This is why in the first class, when I was telling you what you might expect in this class, I drew heavily on this idea that I did not choose to argue what other systems teach about these subjects. I'm here to teach it the way this principle unfolds it. I'm not here to pass judgment on the way anyone else teaches it. I'm not here to pass judgment on the way it has been accepted by anyone else. If you wish to do any comparisons, do it. But do it where it's productive. Do it in the realm of your own experience. Your own imagination is the experiencing faculty. That's where everything originates. And you may feel that you have experienced something when you've been thrown through it physically. But that is only reaping the carbon copy or the print of the actual experience of it in the depth. Now, experience is a very personal thing, and yet it's the most impersonal principle involved. When I say personal, it is when you have discovered your impersonal self. That is a personal discovery. Sounds like a paradox. But it is so much more intimate to you than anything that has ever been personal, that you will regard it as a personal discovery. Now, you have on your sheets a dictionary definition of the word experience. And it says knowledge derived from one's own action. Now, I didn't make that up. This is copied right out of Funk and Wagnall's Practical Standard Dictionary. It's the one that's prepared for the Encyclopedia Britannica. Scholars use it. Metaphysicians use it. Everybody in the world that's thinking on a certain level considers that the standard dictionary. All right. Knowledge derived from one's own action or practice, perception, enjoyment, or suffering. Now, they obviously understand that all of life is not a path of just roses and sunshine. They must have discovered, when defining the word experience that way, that it's perfectly possible, in a deep way, to experience enjoyment as well as suffering and learn therefrom, to reap something by way of results from that enjoyment or that suffering. And the key to this is the very next part of the definition: spiritual exercise of the mind. Now, I've thought of that before and I've read it before, but until I had written this book, I didn't have any idea how accurate I was. That the mind, on a mental level, does not experience. It only selects. But when you go down to a spiritual exercise, you're going to reap some experience. Here is a definition in the dictionary. I'm not accepting it just because it's in the dictionary, but that dictionary is confirming my own experience of the thing. Spiritual exercise of the mind is their definition for experience. So, the being is indeed mind, but it isn't just mental, as we've said before. That the being is as physical as it is mental, as it is emotional, as it is spiritual. It's one being. And you cannot ignore any one of those four quarters. Far from this teaching that we must deny the existence of everything we see. This is just the reverse of it. We must deny that what we see is all there is of what we see. We've got to stop trying to escape from appearances and learn how to expand our perspective so we can inject more into appearances and give a more developed appearance. We don't need to go on with conditions that are less than satisfactory, and we never will rise above them as unsatisfactory unless we get out of this business. Someone was telling me the other day, well, I know that for years and years I studied metaphysics, And I know that until I dropped all that and began facing reality, until I began being realistic, I was sick, I was this, I was that. She decided that in cutting off all the work that she was doing beneath the surface, she was being realistic because she was living right out here in what she saw and what she knew she saw. Well, I asked her then if she was, since she's so successful with this realism, why come to me with a problem? What is this big problem? Is it something that is real? If it's real, then don't approach me with it, because I can't get rid of a thing in the world that is real. And then, when I explained to her that what she had been studying, there was nothing wrong with what she had been studying, but just the way it had been presented to her, she was believing that she must just deny the existence of everything that appears. I say, no. You deny that what appears is all there is to what appears. Then, when you begin to find out what it is within that is sending forth what appears, you can do something about it. Then you're tapping the realm of experience. Now, Blake says that as the true method of knowledge is experiment, the true faculty of knowing must be the faculty which experiences. There again, he had seen the spiritual depth to mind, that it was the mental thing, that the mentality selects, but the spiritual level experiences. That's causative. There is the realm of conviction, and nothing short of it is experience. The rest is sensation, yes, but not experience. So, we've got to tap this faculty of imagination. We call it first a faculty because that's how we come upon it. But after we've begun exercising it and using it, we discover it's the whole being, that it has an imaginative faculty, yes. But like many states, like the state of New York and the city of New York. But New York City is not the whole of New York State. The imaginative faculty is not the whole of imagination. When you understand imagination as the free functioning awareness of being, outside of which there is nothing. So, people resist experience. They just despise it because it cuts them off from the period of innocence. Children, in their age of innocence, are absolutely free from most responsibilities. They find that the world exists for them, and the whole of life, as far as they're concerned, is pretty much the gratification of their desires. They regard society as something that has been provided for the gratification of their desires. And it's a heavenly, blissful time of life when that's going on. But it passes, and it passes in everybody. And it would pass, not without a few pains, but it would pass more easily if we didn't try to hang on and go on into maturity, closed off around this age of innocence, trying to perpetuate something that we have graduated from. You know, as long as you're a child, this imagination operates in just that way. It has no limits on the outside. There's nothing in the world to constrain it. It wanders, it roams, there's no limit to it because it is itself infinite. So if it's ever going to have any direction at all, that direction has got to be initiated and disciplined from within. And you think of sailing down a river, as long as it's still a river, and you could be on a canoe or a raft or whatever, and you've got the banks there keeping the current going in a certain direction. You've got certain sides, certain walls that frame it. So your course is perfectly delightful. But you go far enough, and whoosh, you're in the ocean, and there you meet some pretty severe buffeting. You find that the walls are gone, the banks are gone. There's not a thing there. If there's going to be any direction to this vessel that you're on, you have got to find that direction from within the vessel itself. There are no banks to depend on. That is just when you pass from the river to the ocean. This is passing from innocence to experience. And our maturity, metaphysically, depends certainly on whether or not we make that transition with a little grace, whether we look ahead from our standpoint of working this thing from within, or whether we keep trying to hang on memory. You have one direction you can go or the other. You can advance to imagination and discipline it and direct it, or you can return to your memory images, and you can hang on, and you can try to duplicate experiences on the pattern of the old ones. You can try to make the whole world of experience be to you a duplicate of this blissful innocence. But you're going to be hiding your head in the sand if you do it, because the oak does not stay an acorn. Even the dahlia doesn't stay in the bulb. God himself planted himself in this concept of himself for the purpose of awakening. And it cannot stay asleep. It isn't going to stay asleep. And we can resist it as long as we will, and we can fight, and we can argue, and we can holler and resist. We're still going to awaken. As I said in this book, I quoted that little poem again of Ralph Hodgson. No, it isn't Ralph Hodgson. I found that out. I've been telling everybody this is Ralph Hodgson's poem. It isn't. It's Harold Monroe. Anyway, it's written about the same period. It's called The Rebellious Vine. It says, one day the vine that clomb on God's own house cried, I will not grow, and I will not grow, and I will not grow, and I will not grow. So God leaned out his head and said, you need not. Then the vine flooded its leaves and cried to the winds, oh, have I not permission from the Lord? And may I not begin to cease to grow? But that wise God had pondered on the vine before he made it. And all the while it labored not to grow, it grew. It grew. And all the time God knew. Now the reason I love that so is because people have been told that they are the habitation for God, that they are God's dwelling place. And even though they believe that, that's the vine that climbs on God's own house. And even though they resist the growing, the awakening, it has no effect whatever, because the house is not awakening, the vine is not awakening, it is the occupant that is awakening. So all the while, in our illusion that we are the house, or the vine that grows on that house, in the illusion that we are the dwelling place, all the while that we resist this awakening, doesn't do one bit of good, because it grows anyway. Because we are the being, all the while we have believed ourselves the habitation, we still are the being. Because no one in this world, even though he calls himself one of 3 billion, he cannot prove that anything exists for him apart from his awareness of it. And that is the being. The awareness of being is life, and that life is your life. Not the thing you're aware of being in, that is not your life. That is a temporary encasement. You are not your dresses, you are not your suits. And the day's coming, you're going to discover that you are not just that skin and bones, and veins and blood. But as you advance, you're going to always be interpreting on all 4 levels. You will still, as long as you're in the crucifixion or the resurrection levels, you will always have the 4-fold nature, even though you will pass from the visible view of those interpreting you. But that's not going to stop you from externalizing a literal interpretation. Now, talking about maturing, St. Paul says in that letter to 1 Corinthians, that when I was a child, I spake as a child, I thought as a child, I understood as a child, but when I became a man, I put away childish things. Now there's the thing. Have we become mature metaphysically? Or are we still chanting statements? Are we declaring truths? Trying to antidote our fears? Are we taking words and saying them, feeling that in that repetition some magic formula is going to evolve and something's going to come to our rescue? If we are, we're not maturing one whit. We're trying to take the age of innocence on out into experience. Or are we haggling over the difference between this approach and all the approaches we have known? Because if we are, we're not learning this. The only way in the world to learn this is to get in it, settle yourself in it, and think out from it until you deepen some kind of an experience of it. And when you experience it, then you're going to be able to make your own comparisons and make them very meaningfully to yourself. But we can't do it as long as we think we're the vine that climbs on God's house. You've heard it said in Scripture that the Son can do nothing of himself but what he seeth the Father do. And we've all been trying to accomplish these great wonders as the Son of God. Well, the Son can do nothing, and that's what it's been told so clearly. The Father who dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. And the Father's name is me. I am. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. That's the being that is crucified in me, that understands itself as me, and therefore that is the name of the created being. So it takes the Father to constitute some effect. It takes the awareness of being to become aware of being something. We can't do that as the Son, because the Son is that something that the Father is aware of being. See how we have to ascend and keep backing up over and over again. When I say back up, I simply mean enlarge your perspective, get a wider view, and stop believing that you're just this surface appearance with a mind inside. It's so much more than that. And as you will take up occupancy as the being itself, then you will be discovering the discovery of John 14, where it says, in answer to Philip's question, show us the Father, and it sufficeth us. This very symbol of human imagination says, have I been so long time with you, Philip, and yet hast thou not known me? He that hath seen me hath seen the Father. And how sayest thou then, show us the Father? If ye had known me, ye should have known my Father. That explains, I and my Father are one. We go on quoting it, hashing it over, believing that somebody 2,000 years ago said he was at one with the Father. But Jesus of Nazareth is the spiritual seer's prototype of creativity. It simply means Savior. And nothing in the world in you is going to save you from consenting to the ugly appearances of today, but your own imagination working in its spiritual depth, resurrecting the being that you are out of the belief that you are this little thing. Nothing else in the world can save. That is the one way. So he that believeth on me, the works that I do shall he do also. And greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto the Father. Now if we thought for 1 second that that was a human being boasting that it was so good that it was going to evaporate, but that's all right, they could come along, they'll do great works, because he's gone to the Father. Doesn't make any kind of sense. But he that believeth on me, that his own imagination is the being, he shall do the greatest works that he's ever known himself to do, and far greater than that, if his sense of me advances to be the Creator. If it will take up occupancy as the Creator, not be ashamed, not go hiding its head, not be afraid of feeling that it's blasphemous to claim Godhood. If he will go to the Father, then surely greater works than these, that is, any that we've done up to now, shall we do. And people are doing them right and left. We've got now 7 case histories out of, tonight is the 4th class, the 4th week. Now I've had 7 fulfillments. They're wonderful. We've got to have 90. before this thing is over. We've got to have the 90. So, don't feel that you're being bludgeoned or whipped and you're pressing against time. You're not. You're not pressing against time at all. You're only resurrecting this capacity to feel intensely. That's all. That's what's going to do it. Now, there was a lady that called me a couple of weeks ago, and her cat, she has two of them, but one of them was willed upon her, wished upon her, sort of a stray that she began taking care of and then found she had two cats. Well, her old favorite had just wandered off, and her heart has been sewed up in this cat for quite some long time. And she was really beside herself with fear that the cat had been run over someplace, because at the time she called me it had been gone 2 days. So she said, what am I going to do? Well, I said, what do you want done? Well, I want my cat. Okay. Then if you want your cat, you must start assuming you have your cat, not that she's going to come back. All this malarkey about knowing that she's going to be all right, you can save your effort, because you're just wasting your time and your energy. What is going to be is accepted by the being as going to be, and it keeps it just that far ahead of you. But the Creator's name is going to be or will be. The Creator is I am. So, if you want your cat, you must assume you have your cat. What would you be doing if your cat were there? Oh, she said, I'd probably be mad because she was tramping up and down on me. So she got that feeling that, as the cat would often do before light in the morning, get on her and start treading and treading. A gesture that would have made her clacker into the middle of the room ordinarily, but not this time, because she wanted the cat back. So she got that feeling that the cat was standing on her stomach and actually treading up and down to waken her. And when she got up in the morning, she didn't go looking for the cat. She acted as though the cat were there. She went out and sliced its food and prepared it and placed it down on the floor for the cat. It wasn't until the next morning that the cat came back, having been gone 4 days. But it came back and ate the food that was put down for it. You see, that's the difference between thinking about her cat, wishing for her cat, calling somebody to get her cat back, saying, yes, dear, I'll help you get your cat. Now, you go to sleep, you forget about it, I'll help you. What good is that going to do in resurrecting the feeling that I have my cat? None whatever in this world. This is why, when people say, now, will you work for me on this? I will work, indeed I'll work. I'll work to tell you how to utilize this force and to awaken it sufficiently so you can maintain a feeling. Because I can feel that you've got your cat, but I can only feel it of you. I can't feel it in you. You're the only one in the world who knows your cat is back. Or your bank account is out, your stocks are out, or whatever is bothering. I can feel that anything in the world is true of you, and if I maintain it, I can bring it as an evidence into my world. But because my world is a bigger world, and demands are very great, I'm not going to be able to sit and think about that cat or that stock forever and ever every day. And this is why evidences will come. And in the old days, when I was teaching it the other way and doing their work for them, evidences would go. And these relapses came along. I'm not working that way anymore. I want permanent results. So that if I can show you how to erect a feeling of persuasion, you're never again going to be in a position of standing and pinching your nickel and wondering if they're right. That poor soul, if she had only been willing to learn, if she'd only been willing to discover what the secret was to knowing whether her car was in the right place or not, she would have been so relieved. Now, I say it's a silly, simple illustration, but it certainly does indicate what people are doing on another level altogether. But they are requesting somebody else to make their decisions. They're requesting somebody else to feel that a thing is true. Well, I can feel that it's true, but I can't feel it in you. I can feel it of you, but that won't quite do. Now, the difference between a cause and means. People will say that this certain, I know why this happened because, and then they'll give you the rehearsal of events that led up to it. They'll say that's what caused that. I know that's what's behind it. Well, it isn't what's behind it, it's what's between it. Because I am always the being that is behind it. The spiritual depth of you is the cause of anything. Now, in this book, I have, in speaking about that chart that I drew out of the 4 levels, I said that that diagram is just as useful for diagnosing the nature of discords or unsatisfactory conditions as it is for producing the satisfactory solution to those conditions. Then I made it clear that I had not said diagnosing the cause of those conditions, because the cause of any condition is always the same. The being to whom it appears is believing in his depth that it is so. Now, he may not like it. It may be much against his choice, but his senses are testifying to it because he is believing it is so. So the cause of anything is always the same. There's never another secondary cause. And you will find these references from Isaiah to be very familiar ones, and they're selected only to drive that point home. And they'll take on a new ring. There is no God else beside me. Not somebody 5,000 years ago dictating to someone else and that one writing it down for all time. No. This is someone who had experienced on a level that isn't visible and had discovered that his own awareness of being is the cause. So, there is no cause else, there is no God else beside me. To whom will you liken me and make me equal and compare me that we may be like? Albeit, to whom? Just ask yourself, when you're placing the cause for your discomfiture, ask yourself if that is quite the end. Isn't it more your acceptance of it as the cause? Ultimately, if you follow those chains, it'll fasten themselves right around your own neck at the end. You start looking for causes. You'll be able to trace all the events that led up to that appearance, but they will not one of them have caused it. They will have been means set in motion by some spiritual activity within you. Now, it may not have been some pleasant activity, it may not have been some desirable activity, but it will have been spiritual, because spirit only means essence, or the feeling of actually being. So, if the feeling of actually being something, even though it was unpleasant, has set something unpleasant in motion for you, you found the cause. It wasn't one of the events that led up to it. Those were all means set in motion. I remember hearing Neville talk about how the animal kingdom is the outpicturing of the emotions of man. And that you can trace it through from earliest records, the kind of animals that populated the earth. You could see the thinking that characterized that appearance. And then as the mind of man developed more facile ways for its own direction, the animal world began domesticating. You began changing quite considerably. Well, then they would say, well, the Ice Age caused the disappearance of the dinosaur and mastodon. Not at all. The Ice Age was a means used. If the mind of man was not outpicturing in those terms, in that lumbering, cumbersome way, then that aspect became sterile. They couldn't reproduce. And the Ice Age was only a means used, not the cause. And then, it's quite interesting to note that the archaeologists have discovered a human footprint beside that of a dinosaur, supposedly at the same time, imprinted at the same time, which I love discovering because Blake's statement, where man is not, nature is barren. And if anybody believed that man came after dinosaurs, they were believing physical man, just the appearance. The fact is, man is God present. And if it certainly takes the awareness of being to present an awareness of being even aware of a dinosaur, or aware as one for that matter. But man is not the dinosaur. He's only outpicturing in terms of. Just as man today is outpicturing in terms of a far different kind of animal life. But you know, you look even in the jungles of Africa, the jungles of these places in South America that have never even been explored. The animal life is savage because the human population is savage. And here in the United States, they've got government preserves specially dedicated to breeding buffalo. And it's still a dwindling race. They can't make it perpetuate because the mind of man isn't working that way. It isn't outpicturing in those terms. Whether or not it has become spiritually aware, we don't know. It hasn't on a very large scale. Nevertheless, it's spiritually outpicturing, whether we know it or not. Now, we find in this realm of experience some pretty bitter things. We come across some things that we despise. We come across things we wish we could get out of. We seem to think, because the old systems have told us, now dear, they're not real, so we seem to think that somehow we're going to be picked up and we'll sit on a rosy cloud and we will never again have to face such things. I wouldn't be so stupid as to encourage you to believe that once you become aware of the spiritual depth of yourself as the Creator, that you will never encounter another storm. That would be absurd, because if you didn't encounter another storm, you'd still be sound asleep. The storm is only the interpretation of something you're just now discovering. And upon first view, things definitely, as a rule, look pretty grim. But you're going to encounter obstacles, but they're not going to be impossible. They're not going to be too difficult. Because if you understand the nature of an obstacle, the necessity of a conflict, and you know who you are, you will be able then to learn the lesson from it and grow. And you'll see a couple of very wise statements here, one from Emerson, saying that when it's dark enough, men see the stars. Now, I know that some people absolutely will not face their release until they're just jammed right into a corner and have no choice. There's a lady that was new at this kind of thing that got her answer last Thursday. And she was really literally so pressed into the corner that she had no choice. She just had to turn around and be it. There was nothing else left for her to do. She tried everything else in the world, and she blamed everybody else under the sun. And at least she tells me that. But when she turned around and faced the cause, and put that cause into what she definitely had to have, she had it in a matter of hours. So when it's dark enough, men see the stars. Or that old ancient Oriental proverb that all sunshine makes a desert. If everything is roses and sunny sweet, and to your absolute liking, you're going to stay sound asleep in your belief that conditions have independent existence from your perception of them. But the very experience of suffering a little bit prompts an effort to extricate yourself. You're going to begin to escape if you feel a little bit uncomfortable in it. So welcome it. This is what St. Paul means about taking pleasure in his infirmities. Not sitting down and hashing them over and telling, oh, how I did ache, oh, how it was. Not at all. But to recognize that it was a necessity, that any other way I would never have awakened and discovered that it got its life from my occupancy. They all get their capacity to stand out as situations in your world through your occupancy of it. But you don't have to stay occupied. Once you know who you are, you're free to detach and then face yourself with the new definition you've chosen for yourself and get right into it and fuse with it. And when you do, you're going to see that you're experiencing a completely different meaning. Now, someone asked me the other day, how can I say that so-and-so has happened when it hasn't happened yet, when I know it isn't the case? Here's someone who's working on a problem, and she said, the other day, I got the feeling, and I said to myself, now it's going to be all right, it's going to be this, it's going to be that. I reminded her that going to be isn't going to do it, but I am it. But she said, how do you expect me to say I am this thing when I know I'm not? You see, there's the conviction. And her conviction that she is not is what's going to keep projecting for her the evidence that she is not. Now, that's a perfectly legitimate question, because I know that any number of people are worrying about the same thing. How in the world am I going to be honest with myself and look at situations around me that deny my ideal and tell myself that my ideal has already happened? Well, you can't, as long as you're stuck there taking your cue from situations around you. Don't do that. Learn that the situation that now surrounds you got its substance from your occupancy of it. Then, if you have an ideal that is different from your present situation, be just as willing to shut out the present appearance in favor of the selected definition. And then, deepen your conviction of being it. Stay in it. It won't happen in a second if you're undisciplined. But stay in it and stay in it and stay in it, and through familiarity, develop an actual feeling of being it inside. You see, that girl's complaint was based entirely on trying to picture herself in it on the outside. And that isn't where this work is done. This work is done in a spiritual depth. And it shouldn't be too difficult if you can silence the appearances. It shouldn't be too difficult to get the feeling that you are already what you want to be. But then, when you come out of it, don't compare it with this and say, oh, it didn't do any good. Because that isn't where you're doing the work. Develop your conviction and stay with your conviction until it has become inviolable. When it has become a conviction that can't change, you'll be seeing the evidence of it. Now, there's the technique. Construct your scene. But once you've built it, get into it and be the life of it. Don't take your cue from the outside appearances, because those outside appearances are only telling you what you believe. So if you don't like it, start changing your belief. And don't think you're lying to yourself if you start telling something that the senses don't testify to. You're lying to yourself all the time anyway. All the time that you're believing anything except that you are God and there is none else, you're lying to yourself. So be willing to tell a different lie. Any objectified state is a limitation of the being that occupies it. So you're lying in a way. You're giving your whole reality to believing that you are this one little thing. However big, related to today's standard, it might seem, it is still a limitation of the being that occupies it. So be perfectly willing to tell that lie, because they're all lies, if they stop short of the recognition that you are the total life that anything in the world can ever have. So once you've constructed your scene, occupy your scene, stay in it, be the life of it, and don't take your cue from the interpretation of it. Keep your cue, make it rise from your own feeling inwardly that you are it. There's the thing to watch. Don't compare it with the outside, because once you've got this as a conviction, it'll give evidence in the outside. Now, here's a little punchline from Isaiah, indicating the necessity of experiencing it yourself. when it says, they shall build houses and inhabit them. These houses are the situation that we want to dwell in. They shall build houses and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and eat of the fruit of them. They shall not plant and another eat. They shall not build and another inhabit. How many people are calling to get somebody else to inhabit their scene? I want a scene. Now, will you work on this for me? They shall not build and another inhabit. You've got to inhabit your own scene until you develop the feeling of actually being that. If you're the one that's going to experience the result, if you're the one that's experiencing the dissatisfaction, then surely you're the one that's got to change that feeling, because you're the one who feels it. So you shall not build a scene and have somebody else inhabit it for you, not if it's going to do any permanent good. And you shall not plant a vineyard or some ideal and have somebody else eat it for you. It won't nourish you. It won't satisfy you. It won't do one thing ultimately for you in resurrecting the being that you are. Now, I can realize why this seems to be so unfair based on other teachings. Because the other teachings are not designed, at least they're not claiming to do what we're claiming to do. They're telling you how to get things in your world. They're telling you how to produce better conditions, how to have better health, how to have better environment. Well, this is all well and good, and we're promising that too. But we're not stopping that. We don't want you to have your environment ripped away from you after they've gone to sleep. The old system works just like a sleep-teach machine. It'll feed its suggestions into you until you accept them and give evidence of them. But because you have no conviction of having originated that thing from within, it can be wiped away like a flick of the wrist. We're not teaching that. We're teaching you to awaken the being that is sleeping, so that when that being is awake, you are never in a position of being helpless. Now, we're facing the 20th century, where 20th century, yes, we're in the 20th century. We're facing the 21st. And with another success like today, I don't mean just the giant swimming, I mean the astronaut that took second place to the giants in the headlines. We're traveling through space. We're discovering realms way, way beyond anything that we may have believed before. And when they get to the moon, when they get to Venus, that is going to be as nothing when they discover that there are whole solar systems beyond, and then other dimensions beyond spatial systems. So there's no limit to the unfoldment of this being. And we're never going to make the grade by staying children, trying to hang on to the innocence. We've got to accept the maturity that goes along with experience and face it that way. And it is not a bore. It is not even a difficult chore. It's the biggest thrill in the world to feel that you're doing something about going ahead with the time. But you do it by experiencing and not recalling memory images of the way it used to be. Now, are there questions? I repeat, if there are any questions, please ask them in this period, because I shall not stay to answer them afterwards. I've been pouring it forth all day. I'm perfectly willing to pour it forth all day. I love it. And I pour it forth during here, and I love it. But there is a period provided. Now, if there is a question, please let's have it.
So I would like to know why in the book of Genesis, in the first account of the creation, it says, let us make man.
Good. The question. I would like to know why in the book of Genesis, in the account of creation, it says, let us make man. Because the being itself is fourfold. All the way through, you're going to find those 7 steps of creation. They're just 7, they're not days at all, as we understand days. They are steps taken in bringing forth a conceived idea into visible manifestation. So when it says, let us make man, this is the fourfold being, using all its four levels of interpreting. It's using the physical appearance, the mental level, the mental concepts, the emotional sensation, until it gets the spiritual conviction. Let us. It's one being, but it has those four functions. It sounds so contradictory to say God said, and God did, and God did, and God said, and then come around and say, and God said, let us. Up until that time, it was just God did. But God is the awareness of being. And if it's going to have manifestation, it has to have discovered greater depths to its own being. And while it is still one being, it has four functions. Does that do it?
Yes. But then why did, in the same passage, it said he created the man and woman, and then afterwards this mist came out of the ground, and the woman was created all over again?
Out of man. Right. He didn't say he created the man and woman. It said he created the male and female. There's the thing. You see, everything in this book is symbolic. And because the being itself is father-mother, it has to create its manifestation as male-female. That is, it has to give evidence of the being that is. And if the being is father-mother, then the evidence is male-female. Now, in the second chapter, where it talks about there goes up a mist from the earth and waters the whole face of the ground, and God breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. That's what we described as this shifting of scenery that goes on, this mist that goes up from the earth, until this selection that you have made from the alphabet of possibilities has had the breath of life breathed into it. The mist that goes up from the earth is only that shifting of scenery that's being caused by the reshaping of your feeling, the reshaping of your conviction. And then you have breathed into its nostrils, that is the nostrils of your new definition, the breath of your own life, and that has become a living appearance on the literal level of interpreting. Then, when it goes to speak of woman being taken out of man, this is not male-female. This is woman is the symbol of emanation. That is to say, Adam's desire, Adam's incompleteness had to appear. He had to have an emanation. So, Eve is that symbol, not another person at all. Eve, or woman, said she was called woman because she was taken out of man. Blake says there is a void outside of existence which, if entered into, englobes itself and becomes a womb. All right. Outside of that which now stands out to our interpretation as visible and real, there is a void which, if my being will enter into, we see she's Eve. That's my emanation. And if I enter into it and fuse with the feeling of actually being it, I have fertilized that womb of creation which sends forth the visible manifestation of it. Does that do it?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. Yes, Mr.
Very often when we're in the process of making decisions or making choices, we have an inner argument between somebody and somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Will you explain who these two beings might be?
Yes.
Carry on the
The
argument.
gentleman says very often when we're trying to make a decision, we experience inner arguments between somebody and somebody. Will I explain who those two beings might be? I will first say that those two beings are one being, but they're two different outlooks being sort of sorting themselves by this one being. The being itself is functioning on a mental level and is sorting data. And there's where you're going to have your arguments. And if you want to settle an argument between those two voices very, very quickly, take the part of one of them and assume that it won, that that's the way it now is, and get the feeling that comes from it. If it's unpleasant, take the part of the other one and assume that that one is the one that won. If it's in direct opposition to the first one, it's bound to be pleasant if the first was unpleasant. Then you've made your decision. They're not two people any more than your world that appears so populous with people has any identity apart from your perception of them. The being is one, but the characters appear multiple. Those characters are going to argue. Those characters are going to, I don't know if in what you're telling me, if this involves actual memory images of people who populate your world and you hear them arguing, or if you feel that there are two parts of yourself. All right, this is the way I thought you meant it. All right, two aspects of your own being arguing. So what I said goes. Assume that one argument won, that that's the way it went, that you decided in favor of that, and test the feeling that you get.
You mean test it for a feeling of right?
Just for a feeling of how, whether it makes you feel good or bad, as if it was a correct decision or a very serious mistake. Then test the other one. Anybody that's facing a decision can do that, you know. Go 6 months ahead and look back, assuming that you made this decision. You'll get a feeling in response to that assumption in a minute. And if it isn't pleasant, go right back and assume you made the other one. And if that was in conflict with the one that isn't pleasant, then it's bound to be good.
Couldn't they both be wrong?
Not if they're in conflict with your feeling. The question is, couldn't they both be wrong? Why, yes, indeed, you might be having you might have a dozen. If you have a dozen, you've got to eliminate them the same way. Because if any one gives you a feeling of dissatisfaction, you have got to vacate that feeling, or you'll be asking the law to present for you some more of the same. So if you have a dozen possibilities, sample them until you get the good one. You may find it on the third. You may not have to go way to the 12. You will find one that is to you so right in your depth that on looking back on it, you couldn't have made a wiser choice. Yes, sir.
When we're in the process of building a feeling of a new state that we want to enter, which is in conflict with the present circumstances, on most things we can close our eyes and visualize what we want. But suppose, my case, I have ringing in my ears all the time. Now, when I'm quiet, I have an awful time trying to imagine that my ears don't ring. What mechanism can a person use to try to build this feeling?
All right. On that surface, did everyone hear the question? Yes, I will. Suppose we have a situation physically that we're trying to overcome. He gives a very specific example of a ringing in his ears. It is almost impossible for him to get quiet and imagine that he doesn't have the ringing in his ears. How can we go around that? First of all, the ringing is happening in the same mind, the same surface that you're trying to quiet. And if you really succeed in getting quiet, the ringing would go. But I have a much better solution for that. Is it a hissing sound?
Partly.
A ringing hiss. Well, this is not my experience, but I will tell you how Neville answered this for a woman. She complained about this ringing hiss in her ear.